Low network connection. All right. Today I have my wife Karen and Lillian with us, and we're going to talk about politics and religion. So two of the three things you're never supposed to talk about, we're going to talk about both of them at the same time. It should be loads of fun. Lily, we expect, will be a major contributor, and so we'll see what she has to say. You may have noticed that every 4 years or so, lots of people become super religious. I could not have told you really what Donald Trump's religious views were. I don't know that I could now, but I definitely couldn't have before the presidential election. But as soon as it was time to run for office, what did he start talking about? Started talking about his faith. Lots of politicians do that. You have no idea what they believe. You have no idea if the religion is important to them. But when it's time to run for office, all of a sudden, they start talking about their faith a lot. They start talking about what they believe. It's because in our country, there is this odd mixture of politics and religion. So let's just talk about it for a minute. It's a problem that several people have said. When we asked what are the problems with Christianity, at least 3 people that I know of mentioned that they thought that was an issue. So let's talk about it for a minute. And let's start with something that is a perennial issue. Let's talk about prayer in school. So, how do you feel about people, maybe not in a group, but how do you feel about people praying in school? Like a kid at a lunch table. Should he be able to pray?
Yes.
Some people, right? Yeah. So prayer is going to happen in school whether it's led by a group or not, because people are always going to pray. And the funny thing about prayer is you can't always tell when somebody is doing it. In Nehemiah chapter 1, when Nehemiah prays before the king, there was no indicator necessarily that the king knew Nehemiah was praying. So anybody can pray at any time. Now what about prayer being led at like a football game or something? What do you think about that? And why does that become an issue for some people?
I think they should be allowed to.
You think they should?
I
Why?
mean, if they want to. Because they have the freedom to.
Yeah, so people should be allowed to. So if we're going to allow Christians to pray at a football game, who else should we allow?
Anybody who wants to pray can.
Yeah, so if you had like a Buddhist organization or a Muslim organization, an Islamic organization, you should also be willing to allow the Islamic cleric to come and lead a prayer at the football game, right? Got to be consistent, right? Because we're talking politics and religion. It's not just religion. Obviously, a Baptist church wouldn't let somebody who wasn't a Baptist come to their church and pray. The local Baptist church is not going to invite somebody from the local mosque to come and pray. So we see that. But in a political situation, like at a school where you have the state intersecting with the church, whatever you're going to allow one group to do, you have to allow every group to do. And so if you're going to let Christians pray at a football game, which you said they have the freedom to do, which I would agree with you, it's debatable, but if we're going to let the Christians pray, I think we'd have to let everybody pray, wouldn't we?
Well, it depends on who's at the school and who, your audience.
Yeah, the community, right? And if somebody wanted to pray, I don't think you could shut them out. And I think you're starting to see that at a lot of state assemblies. State assemblies will have an atheist open with prayer, which is weird. I know a couple times there's been an Islamic cleric who opened with prayer. There's been rabbis who have opened with prayer, Buddhist monks. And so you're seeing that with a lot of things. People are beginning to realize that if we really are going to have state and religion mingling, that we have to be fair in the way that we do it. So let's see about student groups. Should student groups be allowed to use public facilities like the Fellowship of Christian Athletes? Should they be allowed to use a math classroom after the school hours are done?
Sure, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about an Islamic student organization? Should they be allowed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, here's one. Throw a wrench in there. What about a satanic student group?
I don't want to say yes.
And that's the issue. And so a lot of places are actually saying no to everything. And as long as you say no to everything, you're being fair. But that also means you have to say no to athletic organizations. You have to say no to band organizations. You have to say no to everything. And if you're going to say no to everything, then you're being fair.
Yeah.
But once you start saying yes, you have to say yes to everything.
Right.
And so if you're going to allow, a political group to meet, like maybe, high school Republicans of Columbus, Texas, if they're going to meet on campus, then you have to allow all political groups, all religious groups to use the facilities. And Texas A&M actually did that. Texas A&M allowed everybody to use the facility. You had to go and register a student group. And if you had a student group registered, then you were allowed to use the facilities. So whether you were a Muslim, Jew, Christian, atheist, whatever, if you had a valid student group, then you could use the facilities for meetings and for discussions, and you could host events on the school property and all of those things. And actually, Texas A&M actually gives the student group, they used to, they would give the student groups money. So if you had a valid student group, the university would give you, it was like $250 that you could spend in renting things and purchasing things for use for your student group. So they had to do that for everybody. If they're going to let, a Christian group, a Catholic student association, then they had to allow everybody to do it. And A&M didn't really have a problem with that when I was a student there, so it wasn't an issue. But you're starting to see where some places don't want religious groups on campus. Well, is that right? What do you think about that? Excluding religion just completely from the picture.
I guess it's their school, but I don't think it's unfair to say we just aren't going to do religious things here. I mean, that's their policy, and I think that's okay.
Yeah, I would agree with you as long as they excluded everything.
Right, all religion.
Because everything. Like, we're not going to allow religious groups to meet, then we're not going to allow political groups to meet. Because otherwise you have the government against religion.
Right.
And I think that would violate the protections that we have. And so we have to be careful. It's a really delicate line to walk.
Yeah.
Once you start mixing politics and religion. And the difficulty as a Christian is being okay with other religious groups getting the same privileges. But you have to think as an American, what if the shoe were on the other foot? What if one day, which is entirely possible, what if one day, 50 years down the road, there are a lot more Muslims? What if Islam becomes the dominant religion in the United States? Wouldn't you want the constitutional rights that we have, or the Bill of Rights, wouldn't you want that to protect you from the Muslim, majority?
Protect them?
Yes, protect. So what I'm saying is right now, in some situations, and I think this is a problem, in some situations you would have Christian student groups that are allowed to meet, but they don't give a voice to the other religious groups. Like, well, there's only 3 Buddhist students, so they don't need an organization. Well, what if the shoe were on the other foot? What if you were at a Buddhist school and there were 3 Christians and the Buddhist school said, well, you can't meet because there's only 3 Christians?
Right.
I would want to be protected. And so we have to, in our country, the way our laws are set up, we have to afford them the protection from the majority. The laws in our country, I think, are to protect the minority. And that's why we have the Electoral College. Like it, love it, hate it, whatever. The Electoral College protects the minority. It gives the minority in our country a voice. Otherwise, San Francisco and New York City would pick the president. And since we have the Electoral College, now everybody in the country gets a voice. And so we have to be careful that we don't allow our faith to infringe upon the protected rights in our country of other people, because we don't live in a theocracy. We live in a constitutional republic, and our Constitution guarantees rights to every individual, and we have to be careful that we don't take those away. Because one day, they could take ours away. It's a delicate line to walk. What about voting? Do you think voting is a good thing? Yes. For all men 21 years of age and older who own land, right? Those are the original qualifications, by the way. All right, so no, that's out, right? Everybody gets to vote, 18 or older, male or female, you get to vote. Voting is a good thing. What about voting according to your conscience? Should people do that?
Yes.
I agree. You should be able to vote according to your conscience. What about legislating morality? You'll hear people say sometimes, oh, well, Christians just want to legislate morality. What do you think about that?
No.
What about murdering? Do you think murdering is a good thing?
No.
So outlawing murder, is that a moral legislation?
I guess.
Good answer. You might have a future in politics. Yeah, our laws legislate morality. It's just a question of which morals are we willing to legislate and which ones aren't we willing to legislate. Stealing, do you think that's morally wrong?
Yes.
So if a candidate came up for election and said, I think anybody should be allowed to steal, vote me in, I'll fix it, would you vote for them?
What?
All right, I'm running for office. I'm not, but I am. I'm running for office, and I said, if you vote for me, I promise to strike down every law that makes stealing illegal.
Okay.
Would you vote for me? I mean legal, not illegal. I'm going to promote stealing.
Okay, no.
Because that's a moral decision.
Right.
And so you would vote against it. So our laws legislate morality. So the question isn't whether or not we should legislate morality. The question is whether or which morality should be legislated. You know, where do you draw the line? And there's a difference between legislating morality and legislating religion. Making a law against murder is not the same thing as making a law forcing people to become Christians, right? Which I'd totally be against. I do not want a law that forces people to become Christians. But do you want a law that keeps people from killing you?
Right, yes.
Totally agree, right? And so we do want morality legislated, but we don't necessarily want religion legislated. And that's kind of where it gets tricky. Because what does God say about murder? Does he say, go do it, it's great?
No. Not always. What?
No, murder is different. We're not talking about war.
Okay.
Murder.
No, thou shalt not kill.
Okay, yeah, murder, bad. The whole love your enemy thing kind of prohibits the murdering of your enemy, right? So that is a tenet. That is a central tenet of Christianity. But when you legislate that morality, are you legislating Christianity? Are you forcing people to become Christians?
No.
No. What does Jesus say about stealing? What does God say about stealing?
You shall not steal.
No stealing, bad. Right? So when we have laws against stealing, are we legislating Christianity? Are we forcing people to become Christians? No. And so then the question becomes, where do you draw the line? And I don't know that I have a real good answer for that. I totally would be against any legislation that forced people to be a religion, right? You have to be a Christian to live here. You have to be a Muslim to live here. I would totally be against that kind of legislation. I would even, to a large extent, be against laws that force you to dress a certain way. And so it just becomes, is modesty a biblical topic?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. But how would you legislate that? I don't know that you can, right? And it becomes really, the Supreme Court has struggled with this, trying to define what is indecent. Right. Like when Larry Flint went before the Supreme Court, when all these cases happen and the Supreme Court is having to decide what is indecent versus what is art. They don't know how to do it. They just say we know art when we see it. And so how do you legislate morality or modesty? If you say that you have to be fully clothed, well, all of a sudden, De Milo's Venus you can't go see that painting because she's naked, right? And you can't go see David. If David were to come on tour in the United States, they would have to put a little censor block up in front of the statue of David. And so it becomes difficult to legislate that stuff. And so you have to kind of find maybe like a common sense line on what can be legislated or what can't be legislated, on what truly harms society and what doesn't harm society. Like if I do something and it hurts you directly as an individual, well, that's bad. But if I do something and you just really don't like it, that's almost a tough luck line. Yeah. It's like too bad.
Right.
And so that's the difficulty. But as far as Christianity goes, or some kind of specific religion, I don't think that we should do that. Is there anything else you can think of that we can talk about to stir the pot some?
You've done a good job.
You think so? So that's kind of how it works. Now, politicians, this is the last thing we'll talk about. Politicians tend to play politics, use religion to play politics, and I don't like that. I almost have a bad taste in my mouth for somebody who becomes religious when they're running for office. I really don't like it. You shouldn't have to tell me that you're a religious person when you're running for office. If I can't tell that you're a religious person, then I don't know that you telling me that you are makes me want to vote for you. And that's part of the difficulty, is that you would want people to know that you're a faithful person, but you don't want to run necessarily as a Christian, right? Because Christianity is not about politics. It's not about political power. In fact, Jesus would say that when it comes to power, he would say that Christians are supposed to live in a way different from the world. The Gentiles, or the world, seeks power over people. But we are to become the servants of people. Right, Bug? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you're going to be a Christian and a public servant, then you really ought to be a public servant. You shouldn't be somebody who's going into politics to get power and take control. You should be going into politics to help people. And you should really honestly believe these things. I actually think, whether you like him or not, I think one of the greatest examples of that in modern politics was Mitt Romney. He was very Mormon before he was running for president. He was very Mormon while he was running for president. And he was very Mormon after he was running for president. Now, I don't necessarily agree with all the decisions he makes, and I don't agree with his faith, but he didn't change when he started running for president, and I respect that, at least. So it's difficult. One more thing.
Okay.
Last thing, promise. Should Christians obey the law? That's politics and religion, right? Should Christians obey the law?
Yes. As much as they're able to.
Okay, as much as they're able to. Give me an example of a law that you wouldn't be able to obey.
Okay. I'm just thinking the one in the Bible applying to me, but like, you can't ever pray. Like, if we catch you in your house praying, you can't do that.
What about a law that said you can't pray in public?
That would be okay. Because I can obey that.
I mean, it wouldn't be okay, but you could obey it.
I can obey that law and still pray.
Right.
So
you can pray privately to yourself without making a public show.
Right.
You could pray at home. Mm-hmm. Right. So I could obey that law. Now, I don't like that law.
Right.
But I can obey that law. And I think that's the burden put upon Christians in particular, is that Christians are to obey the law. Whether you like it or not, Christians are to obey the law. And our goal should be in everything to try and obey the law. So if there's a law that's passed, we should try and figure out how we can obey it first. Instead of saying, well, I don't like that, that's wrong, we just have to disobey that. What if the government, which this is a hot topic, right, big discussion, what if the government were to pass a law that said you can't own guns? What would be the Christian thing, the biblical response to that law?
Don't own guns.
Don't own guns. Does that mean that people could do bad things to you? Sure, it totally does. But the Christian's response is to obey the law. And if the government were to pass a law that says you can't own guns, then the Christians should be the first people in line to turn them over. And I don't know how to understand Romans chapter 13 differently, or 1 Peter, where it talks about submitting to the governor and submitting to Caesar. I don't know how to do that differently, other than being first in line to obey. Would you have a constitutional argument that law is unconstitutional? Yes, but that's not the realm of religion. Religion says obey the law, and so we would obey it and wait for the constitutional debate to take place. But we would obey the law. What about speeding? Should Christians speed?
No. What if they're late for church?
It's okay then. If you're late for church, speed. Floor it, right? Here's where
I've actually seen someone do that. That's so funny. They passed me and then they stopped real sudden and turned to a church parking lot. I was like, okay. It's funny.
you better go forward. But that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, you know? No pun intended. Totally intended. You know, where that's a rule that people like to break. We don't like the speed limits, but if we're going to be submissive to the governing authorities, we have to be submissive to the governing authorities. And that is how severe Jesus is. And so when Jesus in the first century, when people toss him money and they ask him, should we pay taxes? And Jesus said, you know, looks at, here's Caesar's picture, give to Caesar what is Caesar's. Mm-hmm. Jesus was pretty much saying, don't speed. You know, he was saying, these are the laws. You live under this government, you obey the law.
Right.
And so why wouldn't you? If you were a king, wouldn't you want subjects who always obeyed you?
Right.
Yeah. Yes. So actually, being a Christian especially, I think, gives you should be an exemplary citizen. People should look at you and they should say, that person, they're an amazing American citizen. They're an amazing citizen of the state of Texas, or wherever you live. If you don't live in Texas, you should. It's great. Yeah, wherever you live, they try to follow all the laws. And that's great. Now, how judgmental should we be about people who break the laws? We should follow them around. Judgment. Why? We should make sure they get a ticket, right? Somebody speeds, follow them, call the cops.
No, but we should encourage them to follow the laws.
Yeah. It's not our job to judge. It's our job to show the light. And it's our job to be an example. And we'll talk about judging later. It'll be a great topic. But it's pretty much it so far, I think, for politics and religion. So if you have hate mail, you can send it to her. Just joking. Send it to the baby. To the baby. Well, these are hot button topics, so I'd love to see your comments. I can't wait to see where the discussion goes. It'll be interesting. See y'all later. Hurry, quick smile for the camera.